great library in Ethelgard? That was Lyra's whole world. It was this huge old building made of sun-baked stone and sleek cypress wood with shelves packed to the brim with thousands of years of knowledge. Sunlight would stream through the big arched windows, and you'd just see dust motes dancing in the air, lighting up the quiet hustle of all the scholars. Usually the loudest thing you'd hear was just a parchment scroll rustling or a quill scratching away. Lyra was 22, one of the youngest junior archivists. Her slim fingers, always smudged with ink and that pale yellow of old paper, moved easily over a broken tablet, carefully tracing the faded writing. The other archivists, mostly older guys with glasses on their noses, just saw her as hardworking, maybe a little too careful. Definitely not someone who'd do anything exciting outside these quiet research halls. They loved to argue about deep philosophical stuff, or how accurate stories of the Great Flood were. But Lyra, she had a different kind of brain. Underneath that quiet, scholarly vibe, she was a sharp observer. Her eyes had this strategic sparkle, always noticing patterns everyone else just ignored. Ethelgard itself was a chill city, built on peace and learning. It sat right on some cliffs, looking out over a huge green forest. Its people, who were descendants of some really old, wise folks, genuinely believed their knowledge was their best shield, and being neutral was their ultimate defense. Life was pretty mellow, maybe even a little too chill, a stark contrast to the restless feeling Lyra had in her own heart. She spent her days trying to figure out old battle plans and tactical drawings hidden in historical records, a weird hobby for an archivist, and most people just rolled their eyes at it. In the evenings, away from prying eyes, she'd sneak off to a hidden training spot. Her arrows would hit the targets with surprising, quiet accuracy. It was her secret rebellion against the calm, static life she had. She just wanted more, even if she didn't know what it was, often gazing at the hazy peaks way off in the distance that marked the edge of their known world. For months, whispers had been getting louder. Merchants coming up from the southern trade routes, looking thin and with fewer goods in their wagons, would talk quietly about Karnak. They said it was this super-aggressive, iron-fisted empire, just tearing through smaller city-states like a desert storm. Villages burned, trade routes grabbed, old kingdoms falling one after another. Ethelgard's ruling council, made up of wise but maybe too hopeful elders, just brushed it off as exaggeration, the complaints of displaced barbarians. Karnak has always been powerful, Archon Theron had said in a recent speech, but Ethelgard's wisdom and our old treaties protect us. Our walls are strong, our neutrality recognized. Lyra wasn't buying it. While checking inventory lists for the Great Library, she noticed some odd things. Fewer rare herbs and silks from the south, and a weird jump in orders for bronze and iron for Ethelgard's surprisingly small city guard. The patterns were there, woven into the everyday records, screaming about coming conflict to anyone who bothered to look past the paper. Then came the omen. One evening, as Ethelgard's 2 moons rose, a fiery meteor shot across the sky. It burned with a terrifying red tail, looking like it was crashing right into the jagged outlines of the forbidden peaks, the very mountains that separated Ethelgard from the wilder, crazier world outside. The city's high oracle, Lyra, a stern woman whose prophecies you didn't ignore, came out of her sacred room the next morning. Her voice, usually a calm hum, was sharp and urgent. "A shadow comes," she announced to the silent crowd, her eyes locked on those distant peaks. "A time for judgment. The blood comet means change." Some people shivered, but a lot of others, too stuck in their peaceful, scholarly bubble, just shrugged it off as another one of Lyra's spooky warnings. Lyra, though, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. The real shake-up happened weeks later, not with the clanging of an army, but with an unsettling quiet. A single dusty Karnak messenger rode into Ethelgard's main gate. Not a friendly diplomatic group, but a grim-faced messenger, his features hard, flanked by just a few silent, heavily armed guards, whose black and gold armor seemed to suck up all the light around them. No greetings, no pleasantries, just one tightly rolled scroll, sealed with the creepy black symbol of Emperor Valerius of Karnak, a raven tearing at a scroll. The scroll went straight to the council. Lyra, working in a translation room next to the council hall, overheard the tense whispers and strained silences that followed. When the chief scribe came out, his face pale, Lyra, pretending to check a supply list, listened hard. The message wasn't an offer of friendship or a typical war threat. It was an ultimatum. Ethelgard had to open up its ancient libraries and hand over all its unique historical records and knowledge to Karnak within 1 month, or face total reclamation. The message was clear as day. Karnak wanted Ethelgard's knowledge, its accumulated wisdom, not just its land. Right at that moment, while the council argued, Lyra was deep in translating a really old, badly damaged military book, one that went all the way back to their city's founding. The writing was super obscure, the meaning hard to nail down, but as she painstakingly put together the broken phrases, a hidden, coded part showed itself. It wasn't about typical siege stuff. It talked about an ancient defense strategy, maybe even a huge weakness tied to the very forbidden peaks where that meteor had crashed. It hinted at a long-lost power, a forgotten way to fight that could totally mess up a huge army. This method seemed crazy, almost mythical, something modern military thinkers probably just called folklore. The fact that Karnak specifically wanted ancient knowledge, and Lyra had just found this weird but potentially critical strategy, that was a chilling jolt. Lyra felt a cold dread mix with this burning certainty. This was no accident. A huge wave of doubt hit Lyra. This wasn't about dusty scrolls anymore. This was about Ethelgard's very survival, about war. She was a scholar, an archivist, not a fighter or a leader. The strategy she'd found seemed totally wild, maybe even a suicide mission, needing a level of guts Ethelgard's conservative council would never even think about. How could she, a nobody archivist with zero political pull, convince the elders it was real when they just scoffed at even the most direct warnings? She tried to show her initial findings, her broken translations, to her boss, old Archon Theron. He just patted her shoulder. Lyra, dear, you're very diligent, but these are just old fairy tales. Karnak wants power, not old maps about mountain spirits. We just need to trust our walls and our talks. Other younger council members, busy getting ready for a standard siege, just waved her off, saying she was too young and had unrealistic theories. The weight of her discovery felt super heavy. She knew the truth, or at least a big part of it, but no one would listen. The city was getting ready for a regular siege, totally missing Karnak's real goal, the knowledge in their libraries, and even worse, the unique, desperate defense chants Lyra had dug up. She felt alone, stuck with a truth no one else wanted to see. The council's brush-off burned Lyra, a colder fire than the fear of Karnak itself. She squeezed the translation of the ancient strategy, the paper crinkling in her hand. They were totally blind. They actually thought their walls and old treaties would save them, while Karnak was trying to take them down from the inside by stealing their history. Ethelgard's wisdom, the very thing they valued most, was also their biggest weakness. She knew she couldn't do this alone, and she couldn't count on the usual system. Her eyes, pulled by an instinct she couldn't explain, turned to the distant, lonely home of High Oracle Ilara. If anyone in Ethelgard understood omens and the hidden currents of fate, it was Ilara. Lyra found the oracle in her sunny, peaceful garden, carefully looking after some glowing, night-blooming flowers. Ilara, her face a map of ancient wisdom, listened quietly as Lyra, out of breath, spilled out her fears, the council's inaction, and the bits and pieces of the Forbidden Peaks strategy. When Lyra finished, the air just hummed. The blood comet, Alara murmured, her eyes sharp as knives. It fell not to the peaks, child, but for them. A truth hidden right in front of them, dismissed as myth. Alara's gaze softened a little. The council only knows what they've been taught. The real knowledge, that's out in the wild, in the forgotten ways. You're looking for a path beyond library walls, Lyra. For that, you need a different kind of teacher. Alara led Lyra to a secluded, overgrown path right at the edge of the city. There lives someone who understands the whispers of stone and wind, a guardian of the forgotten trails. Kaelin, she said, her voice echoing with old memories, was once Ethelgard's best scout before wisdom became unwelcome. Kaelin was as twisted and tough as the old cypress trees around his simple, hidden home. His eyes, though tired, had a surprising sharpness. He listened to Alara's short introduction, then focused completely on Lyra, looking her over in a way that seemed to peel off her scholarly facade. "So the ink-stained scholar wants to run with the wolves," he grumbled, a cynical twist to his lips. Lyra met his gaze steadily. "The wolves are at our gate, Kaelin, and the scholars are blind." A flicker of something, maybe approval, crossed his face. Her training started the very next morning. Kaelin's lessons were brutal, a far cry from the library's quiet. He taught Lyra to read the subtle changes in the wind, to move through the forest without being seen, to make no sound on dry leaves. Her archery, once just a secret hobby, was sharpened into a deadly skill. Kaelin pushed her to shoot from impossible angles, to hit moving targets by instinct rather than careful aim. He taught her unconventional tactics, how to use the land as a weapon, how to break up a bigger force with precise strikes, how to read ancient trail markers that hinted at forgotten paths through the peaks. "Your mind is a weapon, Lyra," he'd bark, watching her figure out a complex knot pattern that marked a safe pass through a rocky ravine. "The sword is just its extension." He forced her to think like a hunter, a strategist, not just someone who read history books. He introduced her to the idea of the weaving paths, an old network of hidden passages and natural defenses inside the forbidden peaks, hinted at in her ancient text, but which he knew like the back of his hand. These weren't just trails, they were like the mountain's veins, filled with something more than just rock. Their first real test came a week later. Kaelin had heard whispers from his own network of forest dwellers. A small Karnak scout group was checking out the foothills of the Forbidden Peaks, way closer than the council believed. "They're trying to find a way around our walls, not through them," Kaelin observed, confirming Lyra's early suspicions about Karnak's real plan. Under Kaelin's silent lead, Lyra did her first active mission. Using the weaving paths, they moved like ghosts. Lyra's new skills let her spot the subtle signs of Karnak's presence. They watched a patrol set up camp, moving arrogantly and carelessly. Instead of fighting them head-on, Lyra, remembering Kaelin's lessons on disruption, used the environment. A carefully placed rockslide blocked their way back, forcing them into a dangerous detour. A fake fire in the dense woods drew them further away. By morning, the frustrated Karnak patrol had given up, found no good pass, and were convinced the peaks were just impassable. Lyra felt a rush of excitement. Her brain, plus Kaelin's practical smarts, had won a quiet, bloodless victory. She wasn't just an archivist anymore. As the weeks passed, Lyra's training got even more intense, both in the wild and in the hidden lore Kaelin shared. He talked about the peak's ancient sentinels, not actual guards, but energies, rock formations, and forgotten mechanisms inside the mountain itself that could be woken up or messed with. This was the core of the strategy she'd found, a defense powered by the very land. Their efforts caught the attention of others, not the council, but the people who felt ignored. A small mixed group of scouts, unhappy guards, and independent trackers who also saw the coming shadow and felt abandoned by Ethelgard's elders, started looking for Kaelin. They were the Whisperers, a network of loyal people working in the shadows, sharing info. Among them was Rorik, a tough, stocky scout leader with a practical mind and rock-solid loyalty to Ethelgard. He became Lyra's first real ally, questioning her at first, but quickly coming to respect her intelligence and quiet determination. Through them, Lyra got access to more up-to-date info about Karnak's movements. Then came the chilling discovery that smashed through their fragile hope. Rorik and his scouts, on a deep reconnaissance trip, caught a Karnak message runner. The scroll they got wasn't a typical military order. It was a detailed map with Valerius's black symbol showing specific targets inside the Forbidden Peaks, not strategic passes, but ancient sacred spots, marked with symbols Lyra knew from her old texts. These were the very sentinel locations Kaelin had talked about. The message that came with it, which Lyra figured out, was a horrifying truth. Karnak wasn't just trying to get Ethelgard's knowledge to fight it. They were actively trying to corrupt and take control of the peak's ancient power, to turn the land itself into a weapon against Ethelgard. Even worse, the map showed that a special unit led by a ruthless Karnak shadow adept was already deep in the peaks, close to waking up one of these sentinel sites. The meteor, Alara's omen, Kaelin's knowledge, and Lyra's ancient text, it all clicked into a terrifying picture. Karnak knew way more than they should, and they were dangerously close to unleashing a twisted version of Ethelgard's greatest forgotten defense. It wasn't about getting ready anymore, it was about stopping them. Part 3. The Big Showdown. That intercepted map, grim and unsettling, really cemented things for Lyra. Karnak wasn't just an invading army, they were a calculating, dangerous force, trying to twist Ethelgard's forgotten power against them. The Forbidden Peaks, once thought of as just a natural barrier, now felt like the battlefield for their very souls. The urgency was a living, breathing thing, a cold knot in Lyra's stomach. "They're moving fast," Rorik grunted, tracing a line on the map. "Their shadow adept, some kind of sorcerer, will be quick and brutal. But they don't know the weaving paths like Kaelin does," Lyra shot back, a new resolve hardening her voice. "We have to get to that sentinel site first, stop them from messing with it." Their trek into the peaks was a race against the clock and a crash course in ancient magic. Kaelin, now grim and focused, led them through dangerous, rarely used trails. He showed Lyra how the mountains themselves held this strange, vibrating energy, a quiet hum that got louder as they climbed higher. She learned to feel the subtle shifts in the air, the way the old rock formations seemed to breathe. He talked about the sentinels not as buildings, but as power hubs, where the raw energy of the land came together, just waiting to be woken up by pure intention or messed up by dark magic. The blood comet, Alara's warning, Lyra now understood, was probably a sign that Karnak's shadow adepts were already messing with these powers. They moved as a small, desperate crew, Lyra, Kaelin, Rorik, and a handful of the most skilled whisperers. They climbed crumbling ledges, dodged rockfalls that seemed super precise, and avoided Karnak scout groups that just seemed to appear out of nowhere. Lyra's mind, usually processing scrolls, was now a lightning-fast calculator of risks and routes. She mixed Kaelin's lore with her own understanding of tactics, setting up distractions, guessing Karnak's moves, and even creating small traps using the environment itself. One night, resting in a hidden cave, Lyra touched a glowing crack in the rock. A jolt of pure energy surged through her, and for a split second she understood the mountain's heartbeat, its ancient, sleeping strength. It was terrifying, exciting, and confirmed that all those myths were real. They were getting close to the big moment. They found the sentinel site at the heart of a huge, crystal-filled cavern, pulsing with an eerie blue light. It was an ancient, perfectly carved stone pillar covered in symbols Lyra recognized as the deepest, most sacred Ethelgardian writing. But they weren't alone. Karnak's shadow adept, a thin figure wrapped in dark robes, stood in front of the pillar, his back to them, surrounded by a dozen of Karnak's elite guards. He was chanting, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the rock, and dark, smoky tendrils seemed to coil from his hands, reaching towards the pillar. He was trying to corrupt the sentinel. "Now, Lyra," Kalen whispered, his voice tight. "He needs time to finish his ritual." The battle was quick and brutal. Rorik and the Whisperers jumped into action, fighting the guards, a desperate clashing dance of steel. Kalen, with a primal roar, charged the Shadow Adept, pulling out his own hidden ceremonial blade. But the Adept was way more powerful than they expected. With a flick of his wrist, he conjured sharp, black shards from the air, pushing Kalen back, a dark energy starting to gather around him. Lyra moved. This was it. Everything she had learned, every gut feeling, came together. She strung an arrow, her breathing steady, not at the Shadow Adept, but at a specific spot on the cavern ceiling. One Kalen had shown her was unstable, part of the weaving paths of rock and energy. Her first arrow hit perfectly, sending a small cascade of rocks down. The Shadow Adept, annoyed, barely flinched. But Lyra wasn't done. With a second, then a third arrow, she aimed for the weak points, creating a vibration, a hum in the rock that echoed the mountain's own energy. The cavern started to rumble. The Shadow Adept, surprised, tried to get his ritual back under control, but the mountain itself was fighting back. He turned, his eyes burning with dark rage, as a huge crack ripped open in the ceiling right above the pillar. He threw a blast of dark energy at Lyra, but Kalen, bruised but still fighting, jumped in front of it with a shield of pure determination. "Now, Lyra," Kalen yelled, pointing at a specific symbol on the pillar, "the counter sequence." Lyra knew. It was a sequence from her ancient text, a series of touch points meant to stabilize, not corrupt, the sentinel, but it meant touching it directly, right into the surging energies. As rocks poured down and the battle raged, Lyra dodged a Karnak guard, scrambled to the base of the pillar, and with shaking but determined hands, pressed her palms onto the glowing symbols in the exact order. The blue light flared not with the dark, twisting smoke of the Shadow Adept, but with a pure, blinding brilliance. A deafening roar filled the cavern as the roof caved in, a controlled collapse triggered by Lyra's activation of the Sentinel. The Shadow Adept screamed, his dark magic swallowed by the mountain's furious self-defense. The Karnak guards were buried, crushed by tons of rock. Lyra, protected by the burst of energy from the pillar and quickly pulled to safety by a quick-thinking Rorik, watched as the cavern became a tomb. Silence, thick and absolute, fell over the newly sealed mountain. The blue light from the now quiet pillar pulsed softly, casting long, dancing shadows. The air, though dusty, felt clean, pure. Karnak's Shadow Adept was gone, their forces destroyed, the threat to the Sentinel neutralized. Lyra's heart pounded, a mix of adrenaline and deep exhaustion. Rorik helped her up, his face smudged with sweat and dirt, but his eyes wide with amazement. "You did it, Lyra," he rasped. "You woke up the mountain itself." But their victory wasn't complete. Kalen lay crumpled near the pillar, his body twisted, his breathing shallow. He had taken the full force of the Shadow Adept's last-ditch attack. Lyra knelt beside him, tears blurring her vision. His eyes, though fading, had a final knowing twinkle. "The scholar became the wolf," he whispered, a faint smile on his lips. "Protect the knowledge, Lyra. It's Ethelgard's real heart." His hand went limp. The price was steep. Several Whisperers were gone, buried under the rubble or killed in the fierce fight. They had saved the Sentinel, stopped Karnak from using its dark power, but the cost was carved into their very souls. The immediate danger was gone, but Lyra knew this was just the beginning. Karnak would hit back, and Ethelgard, still mostly unaware of the true danger they'd faced, would have to deal with a new reality. The mountain's sentinel was safe, but the war for Ethelgard's soul had just really begun. Part 4. The Journey Home and the New Dawn. The air in the mountain pass was thin, biting with the smell of pine and the metallic tang of dried blood. Lyra, her hands still faintly buzzing from the sentinel's energy, led the tired group of survivors down from the forbidden peaks. Kaelin's death hung heavy in the air, a silent reminder of the raw power they'd faced and the brutal price of their win. Rorik, his face worn out, walked next to her, his usual rough tone softened by what they'd been through together. The few whisperers left moved with a grim resolve, their eyes now seeing the world through Lyra's, finally understanding how deep the threat ran. Their trip down wasn't peaceful. Karnak's patrols, furious about losing their shadow adept and sensing something was wrong, were more active, more desperate. Lyra, thinking like Kaelin now, figured out their moves, guiding her small group through hidden paths, using the very land that had taken lives to hide their return. They saw Karnak's cruelty firsthand, burnt-out scout camps, brutalized small settlements in the wilderness, clear proof of the Emperor's growing impatience and ruthlessness. This wasn't just about old books, it was about total takeover. The realization hardened Lyra's heart, turning her grief into pure grit. She felt Kaelin's mantle, the weight of a leader, settle onto her shoulders. Back in Ethelgard, Lyra expected questions, maybe even anger. What she found was a city on the edge of full-blown panic. The council, finally realizing the true size of Karnak's army gathering at their borders, was a mess, stuck between desperate attempts at talking things out and useless military preparations. They'd built more barricades, but their courage was crumbling. Lyra, dusty and bringing the terrible news of Kaelin's sacrifice, stood before the council. They stared at her, the quiet archivist, with doubt and disbelief. Archon Theron scoffed. "Lyra, you come back with stories of magic mountains and shadow adepts? We're facing a very real army." But Lyra wasn't the hesitant scholar anymore. Her voice, though calm, had a new authority. She laid out the intercepted Karnak maps, described the corrupted ritual, and painted a stark picture of Emperor Valerius's real goal, not their land, but their very history, to be twisted into a weapon. Rorik stepped forward, his word, along with the other whisperers, backing up her story. Then Lyra showed the ultimate proof, a small crystal shard, still faintly humming with blue light from the very sentinel she had activated. High Oracle Alara, sensing its truth, stepped out of the shadows, her presence quieting the room. Alara confirmed Lyra's account, talking about old prophecies lining up and the mountain's spirit waking up to protect its own. The air in the council chambers crackled. Doubt fought with pure terror on the elders' faces. Lyra didn't give them time to back down. She didn't just present the problem, she presented the solution, born from Kaelin's training and her own unique mind. She suggested not just making their walls stronger, but waking up Ethelgard's forgotten defenses, using the weaving paths to channel the mountain's power, to turn the land itself into their ultimate shield. It was a strategy from ancient lore and a deep understanding of Ethelgard's special connection to its land, something only she, with her discoveries, could truly pull off. It sounded crazy, but after hearing her story and seeing the crystal, it was also their only hope. The change wasn't easy, but the immediate threat from Karnak, plus Alara's support and Lyra's unshakable conviction, convinced the people. The council, humbled and desperate, reluctantly gave Lyra immense power. The city snapped into action, no longer just building walls, but getting ready to wake up the very earth beneath them. Lyra became the unexpected strategist of the peaks, directing the city's efforts not just to regular defense, but to preparing the ancient sentinel sites she now understood. She worked non-stop, translating forgotten texts, guiding work crews to specific geological spots, and teaching selected groups of whisperers and loyal guards how to navigate and understand the mountain's energies. Rorik became her invaluable right-hand man, leading the scouts and acting as her practical voice among the military. Ethelgard transformed. The scholarly pursuits now focused on immediate practical uses for ancient knowledge. Students learned not just to read, but to understand the land. The quiet city, once too comfortable, became a buzzing hive of focused activity, getting ready not for a siege, but for a unique natural defense alongside their ancient homeland. Karnak did attack, not with a typical siege, but with a full, brutal assault, expecting an easy win over the supposedly unprepared scholars. But they met not just walls, but the living mountain. Led by Lyra, Ethelgard's defenders used the weaving paths to create controlled avalanches, to send torrents of water down passes, to manipulate the very earth, to confuse and crush the invaders. The attacks were precise, devastating, and seemed almost supernatural. Karnak's forces, confused and terrified by an enemy they couldn't grasp, eventually retreated, broken and shamed. Ethelgard, battered but still standing strong, had won. Lyra didn't become a queen or a traditional general. She became something deeper, the guardian of the peaks, the living symbol of Ethelgard's real strength. The perfect blend of ancient wisdom and practical action. She kept overseeing the protection of the sentinel sites, making sure their power was only used for defense. Ethelgard had changed forever. It was still a city of knowledge, but now it was also a city that understood the power in its own land, fiercely independent and always on guard. The lessons of Lyra's journey echoed through its revitalized halls. The quiet scholar could indeed become the fierce wolf, and true strength wasn't just in walls, but in understanding your own forgotten history. The world was still dangerous and Karnak remained a distant threat, but Ethelgard, with Lyra's quiet guidance, was ready. Her personal journey had saved her people, turning her from an overlooked archivist into the quiet architect of their survival, forever carving her name into the living legend of the peaks.